Welcome everybody to the second Chew the Facts session, Chew the FAQs, with Jono and Dan. Today we've got two questioners that we're going to attempt to chew over this morning.
I've not had breakfast, so this will be my breakfast. I hope they're chewy.
They're very chewy ones, Jono, so we'll get straight into it. I hope it's of value for both the questioners and viewers out there. So here we go. I'll just ask you the questions, Jono, and then we'll just start chewing.
All right, man.
So, first one is from Goodwin, and the question is, how do we talk about Regen Ag positively without being polarizing?
I would say, just one thing that comes up for me there is just sharing it for what it is, and if that's positive, then cool, and if it's negative, then we share that as well. Like it, in order to be really authentic and relatable to the person listening, we also have to be authentic about our inauthenticity. So most people will avoid sharing areas of their life that they see as negative, or anything remotely close to a failure. The cool thing about what I'm seeing on the discussions on the ground is, in sharing our failures, or otherwise known as learnings, then we all get to learn. And it's not to say that let's avoid whatever that was, because in every situation, every season, there's never two replications that are exactly the same. So you can never say that something does not work. It just didn't work in that situation. But I would just say, bring that authenticity and sharing from the heart and sharing what is so. And if it lights you up, generally it lights other people up when you're sharing with that energy and that passion. And I know Penn pretty well. So Penn, you're really good at this, and I would just trust your gut on this one. Just share whatever's there for you, and you'll be fantastic at it. And that's for everyone. Just share whatever's there for you. Let's not, create any. The funny thing is there is a lot more positive than negative, and we're not used to that. And so even that can be seen as like a little bit polarizing. But when you're just sharing your own experience, it's not polarizing, because it's just your experience and it's yours. It's it's not gossip, it's not storytelling. It's well, maybe a little bit of storytelling, but it's with with authenticity, sharing from the heart. So I would go with that.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Dan?
I'd agree with that. And yeah, polarizing is something that does happen around Regen Ag, and it's perhaps you're thinking about it more about authenticity versus inauthenticity rather than positive or negative.
Yeah.
Because like you say, you can be sharing about something that you could perceive as positive, a positive outcome, or a positive aspect of regenerative agriculture that you really liked, or you could be sharing something that you're struggling with and potentially could be looked at as a negative. But it's important to consider both of those, because like you say, the negative stuff can be reframed as learnings and stuff that perhaps there needs to be some more focus on to learn more from. And also perhaps if the person that you're sharing with is not really understanding much about regenerative agriculture, and all they're hearing is positive stuff, but they're sort of like, I don't know, it sounds a bit too good to be true, or it's just a bit weird. If you share authentically and with positive and negative aspects, it's a more true account, and it's more believable, I would think, and probably less likely to be hit with a defensive, polarizing sort of response. If you're hit with a lot of positive stuff, it's like, well, I think you're being a bit unrealistic, but
Well, yeah, in order to, and I just had to Google the name, the meaning of polarity. So to cause, in brackets, people, opinions, etc., closing brackets, to separate into opposing groups. And that happens when we bring, what's coming up for me right now is that happens when we bring like morality to a situation or a discussion, like right or wrong. When we're sharing, we're not sharing from right or wrong. We're not being righteous, and we're not saying our failures are wrong. They're not even failures. They're, like you said, they're learnings. And people are used to having something that they can either agree on or disagree on. And that's sort of like a bit like morality. Like, is it right? Is it wrong? And for us, we know when we're dealing with ecosystems is that there is no right or wrong. There's just what's so. There's actions that you can take that are, more detrimental than others, but again, not wrong. And there's times where we get these really profound outcomes that can be seen as massively positive, but we're not saying that they're right. Like, as in, they're not their way forward. They could be better, and it depends on the context. So I think that's what sadly the word regenerative almost does in a way. It creates a little bit of division, because one of the first things that we started to hear was like, oh, well, does that mean if we're not regenerative then we're degenerative? And that's certainly not the case, but it's implied.
It's almost the opposite of the word sustainable, because regenerative means to like recreate something, and sustainable means to just keep it the way it was. Keep it the way it is, in a way that can be maintained. But regenerative doesn't really attempt to maintain too much. Like, it's more about revolving and recreating or regenerating what is happening. And that's what nature does. That's what the ecosystem is constantly trying to do. It's not trying to sustain anything.
Yeah, it's dynamic.
It's dynamic, and that's why I really like the idea that regenerative agriculture is about ecosystem management rather than farm management or animal management or plant management. It's ecosystem management, because the ecosystem is wanting to regenerate and wanting to continue to revolve. And in order to get really healthy food products out of that ecosystem, you've got to be really mindful of that process, that continual revolving process that's going on, and feeding that system so that you can get the healthy food products that you're trying to get from that natural revolving system. And coming back to talking about regenerative agriculture to others, so I'm kind of looking at it as though you're just wanting to share experiences to kind of encourage others to take up some of these practices as well. And so some of my thoughts were about being generous with your time and attention, and perhaps listening more than talking, because sometimes it really doesn't help to be talking about regenerative agriculture, because it's going to be different for everyone. That's one of the things that comes up a lot. So if someone is interested, perhaps just opening up that conversation and putting your listening ears on for a bit more than you talk.
And hearing the concern, like that's like something that people get caught up with or stuck with is when someone comes in with a concern about something and you think you might know the answer or you might be able to deal with their concern. People are often too quick to jump in with the, oh yeah, but blah, 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 but you know, the blah, 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 rather than just hearing the concern and getting the concern out of the way. Like if someone comes to me, oh, Jono, like, you know, what's going on? How can we grow crops without fertilizer, man? That's isn't that mining the soil? Isn't that, you know, going to deplete our asset? And it would be easy for someone with the knowledge that we have to come in and say, no, shit. You know, in monocultures for sure, but polycultures, that whole dialogue goes out the window. Before you've even gotten to that, deal with the concern, make sure that person's heard. And what I would say in that situation is, yeah, man, like 100%, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? And in my experience for over 15 years, that was my belief, that you cannot farm without inputs. And when you are dealing with plants and pastures that are low in diversity and reliant on synthetic inputs, you pull those synthetic inputs out, you're going to crash. And so for sure, I definitely get your concern. And then one day I discovered that planting plant diversity and creating soil structure then allows for the microbes to step in and do the work that we're doing with synthetic inputs. And I did not expect that. And it sounds crazy. Yet every year we saw increases in things like calcium and potassium in our soils, and soil organic matter is increasing steadily. And it just blew my whole belief system apart. It's crazy. So I completely get what you're saying, because it does sound crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, there's no defense.
Mm-hmm.
We should have done a little role play, Dan.
Yeah, maybe we could do that another time. Yeah. I was trying to remember a quote that I heard that was really quite relevant to having exchanges and not triggering polarizations or defenses or like triggering unhelpful responses. And it was something like, if you're telling an authentic story, you can never be wrong. Yeah, but yeah, something like that. So being a bit, paying a bit of attention to the language that you use, but you can't really go wrong if you're telling your own experiences.
Yeah, well, I would, and I would come in with something else to add to that, is look for where you're trying to be right. Because if there's, you know, one thing I know about human beings is we love to be right. And it comes through in our language, and often it's subconscious because we're so scared of being wrong. But anywhere where there's upset or conflict, someone is being right. And just look for that and just remove that. You can share authentically without being right. You can just share what is so. And like we talk about, for everyone, it's different.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a really good point. And I like the analogy of playing the ball rather than the players. You're not, when you're playing a ball sport, focus on the ball and not the opposition in terms of players. You're having an exchange, and that ball is what you're focusing on.
Yeah, the ball on your side of the court. What happens on the other side of the court where the ball is not your concern? How the other person hits that ball, definitely not your concern. Hey, I'm hitting the ball right, you're hitting the ball wrong. And no one ever says, man, I smashed that ball yesterday. It's always like personal. Oh, I smashed that other guy. No, you didn't. You smashed a ball.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Should we go to the next one?
It was chewy, Dan. It was chewy. I feel like I've had my entree for the breakfast this morning. Let's roll on.
Okay. So second question, also from Penn Goodwin. Discuss human health versus soil health in relation to trace minerals.
Ooh, see, we did it again there. There's a versus.
Mm.
So easy to do. So firstly, those two hand in hand. And when we're talking about, actually, would you like to go first, Dan?
I could, yep.
Yeah, you go for it, man. You go first on this one.
Okay. Doesn't mean I have anything, but I could go first. So human health and soil health. I straight away think about the digestive system being actually quite full of bacteria, especially the small intestine. And those bacteria, those communities, are very similar to bacterial and fungal communities in the soil. And it's not that simple, but the idea is that your digestive system is a house for microbes, and the soil is a house, a house for microbes, and they are the ones doing the work. So I think it's quite similar. The food that we eat and the food that the soil eats is the same. And when you're eating good, healthy food from healthy soil, that contributes to your gut health and digestive system health. So, in relation to soil minerals, trace minerals, or I call them trace elements, they, to me, it's related to how quickly those nutrients are uptaken by the plants and how many resources that plant has access to. So that's going to be influenced by how strong the root system is, how deep and wide it goes, and how many associations with fungi. And so what the reach of the plant to different nutrient sources is. And then if you eat that plant, you're consuming all of those nutrients from wide and deep into the soil. And some of these nutrients aren't easily uptaken by plants, and they're not particularly of concern to the plant so much. Some of these nutrients are more for animals than they are, and for humans than they are for plants. So if you give a plant what it needs in terms of macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, etc., it's going to grow quite happily. But as we eat those food products, we're not going to have those trace elements that the plant would happily take up as sort of like a byproduct of their system for gaining what they want. They just take up all these wonderful nutrients as a byproduct of taking up nitrogen and phosphorus naturally rather than in a synthetic form. That's about all I have to say for now.
That's beautiful, man. And I'll just roll on from there. And what's important to distinguish is that it's not the soil that we're feeding, and when we're talking about nutrients, and it's not the plant that is necessarily accessing the nutrients, as you pointed out, Dan. There's a distinction to make there, is that the food that we eat is not for us, and the food that the plant receives in the form of macro trace elements, metabolites, proteins, compounds, is again not directly from the soil. There's a microbial bridge, like when we're eating, it's not for us, it's for our bacteria and for our gut to then extract and provide to us. And it's a secondary thing. It's not our food we're eating. And in the soil, you did right. When we do things for the plant that we think it needs, And I'll also just throw in there that remember what we think the plant needs, and this is exactly the same with we're talking about human health. What we think the human needs as far as, you know, trace elements and other compounds and nutrients and vitamins, and that's all based upon systems that don't take into account the complexity of the workforce that is the biology, to actively provide those things. You know, when we pull apart nutrients and compounds and treat them as individual things for the plant to have, the plant doesn't work like that, and soils don't work like that. Like you said, Dan, if we're just applying the macro elements, the plant would normally be obtaining all those trace elements just as a byproduct of scavenging for the macro elements. It just happens. It's never focusing on one thing. And if we can just simply bring to the discussion a point of importance around biology, because remember when we're talking about nutrition, it's nutrition is not biology. You know, nutrition is talking about nutrient provision. If we can get the biology in the soil working right, it gets the nutrients from the soil, or every time. It even builds on nutrients in the soil, gets them from deeper, brings them up into the areas in preparation for, you know, next plants and things. And in the human gut, it's the same deal. If we can provide, you know, you hear people talking now like Dr. Zach Bush, who are some other people, Dan, some people that are, you know, really interested in, Dr. Christine Jones talks about it a lot as well, you know, as far as human gut health goes. And there's been some crazy studies done around the world right now around things like fecal transplants, so inoculating people's stomachs with healthy gut biota, and you get that right, and then the plants you eat or the meat you eat, whatever goes in your mouth, that workforce is going to extract from that all of those gorgeous, you know, not just trace elements, not just macro elements, not just what am I talking about here? Let's just move on there. It's going to provide everything in a whole and complete form. And the other thing that we haven't talked about is the impacts of gut function and gut microbial diversity on your gene expression. So we talk about genetics a lot, and a lot of people, just due to their surroundings and their environment and their low gut function, are actually, we talk about susceptibility, right? And we talk about being like having things that are hereditary and passed down. All of that is again, it goes out the window when we start talking about biological function. You get your gut stimulated with a vast array of microbial diversity, literally you're going to start having genes switch on. Now we call it quorum sensing. Molecules start to fire in your system that never had before, and things start to wake up. You reach a whole nother level of performance and you know, not just as far as physical, but also, you know, mental focus and performance. And that's all a biological thing. Like we talk about things like magnesium for sleep and relaxation, and you know, various other things just for certain byproducts. But you have a biological focus, and first, you know, the obvious one is do no harm, like you said in the soil before, Dan. When we're applying all these nutrients synthetically, we're destroying the networks that provide those nutrients naturally, and so it sort of gets you on the rat wheel. And in the human gut and in our bodies, it's often, and this is the harsh truth about today's, you know, time, is that a lot of what we eat is actually really nasty and doesn't do good things for our gut. And so a lot of the time, the biggest step you can take is getting out of the way that bad stuff to allow for the good stuff to thrive, the life.
What you're talking about is epigenetics, Jono.
Yeah, man.
DNA is actually
It's dynamic.
not a static thing. It's dynamic, and it relates to the microbes in our food, and they can communicate. And there's even quite a bit of emerging science around that the genetics can be changed, the DNA can be changed through gut microbiota, and yeah, it changes your gene expression. It changes everything about you, what food you eat, and how healthy your microbiota is. And it's not just in the gut either. It's on your skin, in your hair. It's all over you. You're a walking microbe house.
Yeah. I actually,
yeah.
do you want to hear something really crazy, Dan?
Yep.
Last week, I went to the doctor because, as a lot of you will know, I'm recovering from a few serious injuries from a car crash. And it was just a routine doctor's visit. And I got a fill-in doctor from Dunedin, just a temporary doctor who was there for the day, just filling in. And I sat down and I just started talking about my healing, and I mentioned to her about how I'm really focusing on nutrition to help me with my healing, and that's all I said. And then she said, yeah, the crazy thing is, Jonathan, and she called me Jonathan because that's my name. The crazy thing is, Jonathan, our agricultural practices mean that the vegetables that we grow don't actually have the nutrients that they need and that we need just because of the way we farm. And I was like, yep, yeah, tell me more. And she's like, well, a lot of synthetic chemical use, and we don't allow the plant to achieve what it needs through the biology in the soil. And I was just like, okay, we need to have a conversation, and told her a bit about what I do. And she's just like, oh my goodness. And she was like, this is what she said, man. I'll quote her. She said, I believe we're just basically walking pieces of soil. This is a doctor. And she was experienced, man. She was like, she said she'd been a doctor for over 20 years. And I was just like, that was so humbling, because I believe that we are just big walking, like in my poem, We Are Nature, I wrote, this bag of bustling biology filled with significance.
Oh,
That's
nice.
what we are.
Yeah.
What are we, 99% bacteria on a cell count?
Mm. And then we buy antibacterial soap.
Oh my goodness, man. It's everywhere. I heard a lovely story. Some guests on a podcast recently talked about they went to vote, this couple, and they were told they had to put alcohol hand sanitizer on, and they refused. They're like, nah, I'm not putting that stuff on. And we have it that you've got to kill everything. And this guy who was requesting that these people put the alcohol gel on their hands sort of went to step in the way. And this guy who's like really loud, one of the guys that refused to put the hand wash on, was just like gave him this look like, you're going to stop me voting, and they got out of the way. But isn't it absurd that this whole disconnect from nature, and this whole thing that germs are bad and yuck, like it's I don't know, man. It's probably the biggest thing that's in the way, right? Our disconnect to
Yeah. And to take a sideways step a little bit, back to epigenetics, it has a lot to do with allergies, and it also has multi-generational effects, this epigenetic thing. So it links generations, it matters what your grandparents, what they ate, as to what genes you're actually expressing at the moment. And it's going to matter for your grandchildren what you eat and how you live your life in terms of interacting with microbes. It's going to matter for them. So it's a really complicated part of science, and it's a really cutting edge thing, but it's so interesting. This science around how allergies develop and how that's related to the microbiome and genetics. And it's quite humbling because we are so dependent on our microbiology, and we can't continue to treat microbes as if they're something to be exterminated because it's at our own detriment.
Beautifully said, man. And it's humbling, and it's also scary, epigenetics, for people like me who have had a lot of chemical exposure. You know, sadly, that isn't just going to affect me. It's you know, sometimes it does, you know, cause me to get a little bit in my head sometimes, but I'm aware that, you know, a lot of these exposure events are amplified through epigenetics, you know, often intergenerational. So it won't, you know, you hear Nicole Masters talk about it in her book. It's not necessarily you that it's going to affect, but it'll be your children or their children, because of our choices. So yeah, man, really, really important that we look after ourselves.
All right. Shall we go into the last one?
Yeah, man.
This is the main course. And I probably don't have very much to offer on this. I'm going to be just listening mainly. It's a double question. It's the last one from Goodwin, but I'll lead into Debbie Coleman's a little bit more detailed question. So, you ready?
Yeah, man. Hit me with it.
Okay. So Penn says, can you share a story about multi-species crops, varieties, and their successes and what went wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And then Debbie Coleman's question is pretty much that, a story about a multi-species crop with successes and something that went wrong. So here it is. Debbie says, we have a tight soil from years of cropping and abuse, chemicals and rotary hoeing. We put in a diverse multi-species mix, full of hope that it would kickstart a turnaround. While the diverse species have grown, it is really struggling to grow. For example, the sunflowers are spindly and half the height they could be. We are planning to spray fish hydrolysate, humates, etc. So the questions are, if we graze off what has grown, what should go in next? Do we direct drill more seed in? What type of seeds? Do we leave it ungrazed and fallow until next spring? It looks like it is in real need of nursing care to turn it around.
So we're stepping into advice there, which I think we should avoid. But I'll touch on those things. So firstly, with Penn, with regards to a story, yeah. So I mean, here's one. On the edge of Lake Hawea, up at Lake Hawea Station, there was this area that was, I kid you not, rock, like schist rock, and next to no topsoil. There were bits of soil between rock, but it was rock. And we direct drilled in a annual setup crop, and was sort of like, it was new area. It had just been sort of broken in and fenced and, you know, de-shrubbed and cleared. And it just grew like it just, you know, beyond belief. No fertilizer, no chemicals. Although actually no, there was a termination, a spray out. And yeah, it was just like the perfect, start for these plants to get away. And man, they got away. It just blew my mind, and then we've also had areas on the same property that we didn't spray and that we drilled straight into what was really dry pasture. And then we got rain and we just had the odd, um, plant that we planted come up through the pasture, but really the pasture was already there established. And once it got rain, it was the first out of the gate with leaves up compared to the seed starting from seed. And so we learned that we have a much better success rate with making sure that the diverse species crops have that opportunity, and that can either be done through cultivation or through a spray out. And when we're spraying out, it's with this situation, with all my clients that I deal with, it's always we buffer and chelate the glyphosate and add a biological feeder in there as well to tie the biology over in the absence of the food sources you've just killed, and to carry the microbes over until the new plants germinate and carry on that role of feeding the microbes. And so that was a big learning, was the drilling in thing into existing pasture. The success is reflective of there being a lack of opportunity for those plants to really get established. And on to the next sort of question is, with the drilling into a soil that's really, really tight, from what the question entailed, was that the soil was really lacking structure and porosity. And there's a few things about that. So I used to, and I used to have a belief, but it used to be a lot firmer with me, that the plants do the work, and they do. And it sometimes takes time. If we're dealing with a really tight soil, it might be high mag, it might be, cultivated to within an inch of its life, and really in need of some porosity and some breathing space. That the plants, as long as you get them germinated, they will, over time bring that porosity, bring that structure. Then the microbes can start to colonize the soil, and then they take over the role of feeding those microbes, and there starts symbiosis. But you can speed up that process by, and I used to have a belief that cultivation was like a complete no-no. But again, before no right or wrong, I've seen results on farms with similar, from what you're describing, similar soils, treatment, history, management, and were really depleted and almost like concrete, and then were grazed with animals in the winter, and it just got really nasty. And we did a trial on cultivating just with grubber, maxi-till, and then roller. So sort of avoiding deep cultivation like ploughing. If we had a ripper, we might have used a ripper in this situation, but it was on riverbed, so rippers would have just made quite a mess. So we just wanted to do like a timed cultivation. And so grub, corner to corner, maxi-tilled with the crumbler bar on the back, and then Cambridge rolled and drilled. That trial of that cultivation versus no cultivation was like, seriously, it wasn't just day and night. It was like 5 times the growth in the area where there's compaction, where it was cultivated. And I'm not saying cultivation's a good thing, because you've got to remember that is a really destructive practice. It takes a long time to recover from that. And we've got farms to run here. So it's a bit like taking a step back, but taking 5 steps forward, because the plants you're planting afterwards, as long as there's a diverse array of different plants that you're putting in behind your cultivation, it's going to rapidly repair that damage that you've done. And it's going to have the opportunity to do that because it's got again, that clean slate, and the soil has porosity enough to house the biology. The plants are going to feed that biology, and the symbiosis starts straight away, and that those plants get away, and it's crazy, the amount of root biomass as well as above ground biomass that's created. In this situation where I observed cultivation and not, in this situation where the soil was really, really depleted, then it seemed to be a much better option, although it was more money and cultivation. There was a much better result. So that was a good learning. It's worth looking into, how do I get oxygen into my system if I don't have oxygen? It's probably the primary thing that you want to look at whenever I'm creating a mix. I ask the person that wants the mix to send me a photo of the soil profile. They always ask, "Oh, what about soil tests?" And I say, I don't want to see soil tests. So just let me see the soil. If I can see structure and porosity, then it means we can grow more things. If I can't see structure and porosity, we're going to have to go hard on plants that are aggressive with their root architectures. So, beans, tillage radish, lupins. There's lots of really grunty annual plants that can repair soil structure. So that's the first place to start, is soil porosity and structure.
Yeah, because those roots need oxygen, don't they? So
it's just like you can live for a long time without eating, and you can live quite a long time without drinking. But if you block your nose and your mouth, you're not going to last long, and the soil is no different. If you want your workforce to thrive under the ground, they need air. It's like locking us in a room, a few billion of us in a room with no air. Good night, nurse. Nothing gets done in that factory.
So, what should they do next without getting too prescriptive? Is there some sort of, now that they've got this more diverse crop, but it's not really thriving, do they start again, or do they look at other ways of care to turn it around?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to this like it's a scenario in my own world. So it's not going to be advice. It's like, here's what I would do. And so what I'll be looking at is the first thing, digging a hole and looking at soil structure. Has it improved? Have I got worms? What does the soil smell like? Does it smell earthy and aerobic, or does it smell neutral or even stagnant and stinky and anaerobic? That's the first thing. The other thing that comes to mind that I want to be looking at is, are these plants going to drop some seed? It sounds like probably they are. When plants are stressed, when they're growing in environments where they're lacking oxygen and moisture, it's been said stress for any organism brings on the need to reproduce. And so plants, no different. When they're stressed, they'll drop their seed. And if we can do that, then it would save you having to do another planting, and you would get something growing over autumn. It sounds to me like you definitely need to continue with the annual species rather than perennial, because the soil is not functioning yet. So sticking with annuals with more aggressive root structures is going to be the way to improve that soil. If the soil is still rock hard and you're really concerned about it, it's stinky or neutral in smell, and you've got, soil mottling and water infiltration is next to nothing, then you may want to look at starting again, and it might involve a cultivation. And doing it in the dry is the best time. And so that might be, coming out of the spring, it might be a good opportunity, or, even now, but just depending on where you are in the world, and your temperatures is going to reflect what plant species you'll be able to use at this time of year. So that's what I'll be doing. That's what I'll be looking at. And you can't go past a water infiltration test as well as a guide, to bring real figures to a question like, what's my soil porosity like? Well, water infiltration test is going to, it doesn't lie that test. If the water's not going in, you're not going to have air going in either. So it's a great one to do. I actually just shared it on the Mighty Networks page, on the Living Systems page yesterday, a how-to video on how to do water infiltration tests. So get into that.
Nice. All right. Well, that was our last question.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Have we got anything else to share?
I don't think so.
No.
I think we should leave it there and say thanks for listening, all that are listening.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers, Jono.